The phone pressed against Nelson Huffman's ear felt like ice despite the June heat radiating off the gym's parking lot asphalt. His wife's breathless voice filled the silence. "Just finishing up, babe." Then he heard it. A man's voice in the background, muffled but distinct. "Same time Thursday?" Nelson's grip tightened on the steering wheel of his Audi. Her silver Honda was in the parking lot. He'd circled twice to be sure. The lie sat between them like a living thing. And for the first time in their 8-year marriage, he didn't call her out on it. "No rush," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm grabbing dinner with Morris. See you at home." He ended the call and sat in the empty parking space where Nikki's car should have been. The math teacher in him, the one who'd built a career finding patterns in chaos, began calculating variables. 5 days a week for 3 months. Always the same excuse. Her sudden devotion to fitness that made her skin glow and her body transform into something magazine-worthy. The new lingerie he'd found in the laundry, tag still attached. Nelson wasn't the confrontational type. His students at Jefferson High knew him as the cool teacher who made calculus feel like solving murder mysteries. Even-tempered, analytical, but underneath that affable exterior lived a mind that never stopped working angles. He drove home slowly, his thoughts assembling like pieces on chessboard. Their story had started at a coffee shop near the university where she'd been finishing her marketing degree. He'd been the graduate teaching assistant who made her laugh during office hours, the guy who could explain derivative functions and quote Monty Python in the same breath. They'd married young. She was 23, he was 26. For years, it had been effortless, until it wasn't. Nelson had noticed the distance creeping in last fall. Nikki started working late at the advertising firm where she'd become a junior creative director. Then came the gym obsession in March. He'd been genuinely supportive, even proud. His wife was taking care of herself, finding confidence. He'd suggested joining her twice. Both times, she'd shot him down with surgical precision. "It's my alone time, Nell. You understand, right?" He'd understood. Now he understood differently. The house was dark when Nikki arrived home 2 hours later, her gym bag slung over her shoulder. Nelson was at the kitchen table, grading papers under the pendant light, a bottle of craft beer sweating beside his red pen. "Hey, babe." She kissed the top of his head. She smelled like expensive soap, not sweat. "How was dinner with Morris?" "Canceled," Nelson said without looking up. He had a thing with his kid. "Oh." A pause. "You should have called. I would have skipped the gym." He finally met her eyes. Nikki was beautiful, objectively stunning with her dark hair and sharp features that seemed to improve with each passing year. Right now, she looked tired. Guilty? Or was he projecting? "It's fine. I'm buried in these calculus finals anyway." He smiled, the same easy smile that made students trust him. "You killed at the gym. I take it." "Absolutely destroyed." She patted her flat stomach. "I'm going to shower." When the bathroom door closed, Nelson opened his laptop. He'd already installed tracking software on her phone weeks ago, a decision that had made him feel dirty but necessary. The kind of thing he'd judge others for. Except here he was. The GPS history painted a story. Nikki hadn't been to fitness first gym in 6 weeks. Instead, she'd been going to an address in the Riverside district, always on weekdays, always between 5:30 and 8 p.m. He pulled up a street view. A modern apartment complex called the Meridian. Expensive, the kind of place young professionals with too much money rented. Nelson's jaw clenched. He needed more than GPS coordinates. He needed names, faces, evidence that would make the truth undeniable. Because despite everything, a part of him still hoped he was wrong. He spent the night digging. Phone records showed dozens of calls to a number not at her contacts. Cross-referencing through social media and some creative Googling led him to a LinkedIn profile. Russ Erickson, 34, senior account executive at Pinnacle Marketing Group, the same firm where Nikki worked. Nelson studied the photo. Russ had that polished look, expensive haircut, teeth too white, jawline that probably made him popular in college. The guy's profile bragged about his corner office, his recent promotion, his passion for disrupting traditional marketing paradigms. The kind of guy Nelson would have mocked in the teacher's lounge. The kind of guy his wife was apparently sleeping with. He found Russ's address in public records. The Meridian, Unit 14C. Bingo, Nelson whispered. By Friday, Nelson had a plan. It started with Morris Schaefer, his best friend and the school's basketball coach, a guy built like a tank who'd been Nelson's roommate in college. Over beers at their usual dive bar, Nelson laid out everything. Jesus Christ, Morris said, his massive hand dwarfing the pint glass. You're sure? GPS doesn't lie. Neither does the hotel charge on our credit card from 2 months ago. Nelson had found that gem yesterday. The Grandview Hotel, the same night Nikki claimed she was at a team-building retreat. I need your help. Morris leaned back. What are we talking here? You want me to introduce his face to a brick wall? Because I'm morally opposed to violence, but I'd make an exception. Nothing that crude. Nelson pulled out his phone, showing Morris a series of screenshots. Russ Erickson isn't just sleeping with my wife. He's embezzling from Pinnacle Marketing. Small amounts, but consistent. Been doing it for about a year. Morris's eyebrows shot up. How the hell did you find that? Nikki's work laptop. She leaves it open at home, logged into the company server. Russ has been coding personal expenses as client entertainment costs. Country club memberships, luxury car leases, that apartment. The guy's living beyond his means and cooking the books to cover it. You devious bastard. Morris grinned. What's the play? I need documentation. Photos, statements. Enough to hand to Pinnacle CEO and the state attorney general. But here's the beautiful part. I'm not doing it to protect Nikki. I'm going to make sure she goes down with him. Nelson's smile was sharp. She's been signing off on his expense reports for 6 months. As his direct supervisor, she's either complicit or criminally negligent. Either way, her career's toast. That's cold, man. She made her choice. I'm just helping her live with the consequences. The following week, Nelson executed Phase 1. He'd befriended Pete Bush, a private investigator he'd met through a friend, and hired him for surveillance. Pete was a wiry guy in his 50s who looked like a retired accountant, but had the instincts of a bloodhound. Got him coming and going, Pete reported Tuesday evening, sliding a manila folder across Nelson's desk. 3 visits this week. She's there for 2 to 3 hours each time. I've got time-stamped photos, video of them at the window. It's a 7th-floor unit. Didn't bother closing the curtains on Monday. Nelson flipped through the photos. There was Nikki, laughing in Russ's apartment, wearing a dress Nelson had never seen. Another shot of them on the balcony, his arm around her waist. The final image showed them kissing, visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, backlit like a movie poster for Betrayal. This is good work, Nelson said quietly. There's more. Pete pulled out another folder. Your boy Russ has a pattern. He's been running this scam at 3 different companies over the past decade. Gets promoted, embezzles, moves on before anyone notices. Pinnacle's just his latest victim. I found 2 of his exes willing to talk. Both said he targeted women in positions of authority, used them to access financials. Nelson felt something cold settle in his chest. Nikki wasn't special to Russ. She was a mark, a convenient combination of access and attraction. Here's what I don't get, Pete continued. Why hasn't Pinnacle caught this yet? Because Nikki's been covering for him. She thinks it's love. Nelson closed the folders. She has no idea she's being used. You gonna tell her? Eventually. Right now, I'm gonna make sure when this blows up, it takes them both down. Phase 2 required help from an unexpected source, his wife's own ambition. Nikki had been working on a major campaign for a pharmaceutical client, the kind of account that could make her career. She'd been bragging about it for months, staying late to perfect the pitch. Nelson knew from her emails, yes, he'd gained access to those too, that the presentation was scheduled for next Thursday. The CEO of Pinnacle, George Bowers, would be there along with executives from the client company. What Nikki didn't know was that Nelson had already sent an anonymous tip to George Bowers' personal email. Nothing accusatory, just a polite suggestion to audit expense reports from the marketing department, specifically those approved by Ms. Nikki Huffman and Mr. Russ Erickson. The email included just enough detail to be taken seriously, specific dollar amounts, dates, vendor names that didn't quite check out. George Bowers was known in the industry as a ruthless businessman who'd built Pinnacle from nothing. He didn't tolerate incompetence. and he absolutely despised theft. Wednesday evening, Nelson came home to find Nikki pacing in the living room. Phone pressed to her ear. "I don't know what you're talking about," she was saying, her voice tight. "George, I review every report carefully. If there's an issue, it's news to me." Nelson set down his briefcase quietly, watching her unravel. "An audit? Now, we have the Cardwell Pharma pitch tomorrow." She listened, her face draining of color. "No, of course I'll cooperate fully." "Ah, yes. Thank you." She ended the call and stood frozen. "Everything okay?" Nelson asked innocently. Nikki turned to him, and for a moment he saw genuine fear in her eyes. "There's some kind of accounting discrepancy at work. George is bringing in an external auditor. They're reviewing all my approved expenses from the past year." "That sounds serious." "It's nothing. I'm meticulous with paperwork." But her hands were shaking. "It's probably just a routine thing." Nelson walked over and pulled her into a hug. She melted against him, and he felt her betrayal and her fear warring in the tension of her body. Part of him, the part that still loved who she used to be, felt guilty. The larger part felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "I'm sure it'll be fine," he murmured against her hair. "You're brilliant at your job." She pulled back, searching his face. "Thanks, babe. I don't know what I'd do without you." He smiled. "Neither do I." Thursday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Nelson taught his classes with his usual easy humor, helping students understand the elegance of mathematical proofs while his phone buzzed periodically with updates from Pete. At 10:47 a.m., auditors arrived at Pinnacle, going through files now. At 1:23 p.m., Russ Erickson called into George Bauer's office. "Looks heated." At 2:15 p.m., Nikki just got summoned. She looks confused. Nelson was in the middle of explaining the chain rule when his phone rang. Nikki's name flashed on the screen. He excused himself to the hallway. "Nell." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I need you to come to my office. Right now. Please." "What's wrong?" "They're saying I approved fraudulent expenses. That I helped Russ steal from the company. It's insane. I need a lawyer. I need you." The desperation in her voice almost made him feel sorry for her. "Almost. I'm on my way," he said. He wasn't. Instead, Nelson drove to the Meridian. Pete had given him the code to the building's side entrance, courtesy of a well-tipped maintenance worker. He took the elevator to the 7th floor and found Unit 14C. The door was unlocked, sloppy, but Russ probably had other things on his mind. Nelson stepped inside the apartment that had hosted his wife's betrayal. It was aggressively modern, all glass and chrome, the kind of place that screamed, "I make more money than you." He didn't have much time. Using the keys Pete had copied during an earlier reconnaissance, Nelson accessed Russ's home office. The laptop was password protected, but Nelson had come prepared. A simple USB drive with software he'd acquired through less-than-legal channels cracked it in under 3 minutes. What he found was better than he'd hoped. Russ kept meticulous records of his embezzlement going back 18 months. Spreadsheets detailing exactly how much he'd stolen, where he'd hidden it, which expenses he'd fabricated. And there, in a folder labeled Insurance, were emails between Russ and Nikki. Not love letters. Strategy sessions. Nelson's blood ran cold as he read through them. Nikki wasn't an innocent party. She'd known about the embezzlement for at least 4 months. Russ had brought her in on it, promised her a cut, convinced her they could skim enough to start their own boutique agency. The affair wasn't a mistake. It was a partnership. Nelson copied everything to his drive, then did something he'd been planning for days. He drafted an email from Russ's account to George Bauer's, laying out the entire scheme in detail. He included the spreadsheets, the falsified documents, and a confession that implicated both himself and Nikki fully. Then he scheduled it to send in 2 hours. By the time anyone realized it wasn't actually from Russ, the damage would be done. Nelson locked up the apartment and left, his hands steady, his mind clear. The teacher who'd built a career helping students find elegant solutions to complex problems had just solved his most personal equation. The email sent at 4:47 p.m., exactly as scheduled. Nelson was sitting in his car outside Pinnacle's downtown office when Pete called. "It's chaos in there," Pete reported. Building security just escorted both of them out. Cops showed up 10 minutes ago. Your wife's been trying to call you. Looks like about 20 times in the last hour. I know. Nelson had silenced his phone. What about Russ? Last I saw, he was in handcuffs screaming that he didn't send any email, that someone hacked his computer. Nobody's buying it. Perfect. Nelson drove home and waited. The house was exactly as they'd left it that morning. Her coffee cup in the sink, his graded papers on the counter, the illusion of their life together preserved in small domestic details. Nikki arrived at 7:30 p.m. She looked destroyed. Makeup smeared, hair disheveled, her professional armor completely stripped away. When she saw Nelson sitting calmly at the kitchen table, something in her expression cracked. "Did you do this?" she asked, her voice raw. "Do what?" He kept his tone neutral, almost curious. "The audit, the email, all of it. Was it you?" Nelson stood slowly. "The better question is, did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I'm so stupid I believe the gym story indefinitely?" Her face went white. "Nell, I drove to fitness first 6 weeks ago, Nikki. Your car wasn't there. It's never there because you haven't been to that gym since March." He pulled out his phone, showing her the GPS history. "You've been at the Meridian, Unit 14C, with Russ Erickson, your colleague, your partner, in more ways than one." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I can explain. Can you explain the embezzlement? The falsified expense reports you've been approving for months? The emails where you two planned to steal enough money to fund your own agency?" He watched her crumble. "I found everything, Nikki. Every lie, every stolen dollar, every moment you chose him over our marriage. It wasn't supposed to be like this." She was sobbing now. "Russ said it was foolproof. He said we'd be set up in 6 months, that we could both leave Pinnacle and start fresh. I was going to tell you. I was going to ask for a divorce once we were stable. How merciful." Nelson's voice cut like a blade. "You were going to ruin me financially with a divorce after stealing money with your boyfriend. Did you even love him, or was he just a means to an end?" "I loved you." She looked up at him with desperate eyes. "I still love you. This got out of control. Russ was exciting and dangerous, and he made me feel." "Save it." Nelson moved toward the door. "I don't care what he made you feel. You made your choices. Now you live with them. Where are you going?" "Anywhere but here. I've already filed for divorce. The papers will be served tomorrow. I've documented everything. The affair, the embezzlement, your complicity. You won't get a penny from me. And if you're lucky, you'll only spend 3 to 5 years in prison." "Prison?" Nikki's voice climbed to a shriek. "Nell, please. You can't do this. I'll lose everything." "You already did." He grabbed his jacket. "You lost it the first time you lied to my face. What about forgiveness? What about our vows?" Nelson stopped at the door, his hand on the knob. "You want to talk about vows? Forsaking all others. In good times and bad. You broke every promise we made. I'm just holding you accountable. This is revenge. This is cruel." "No." He turned back one last time. "Revenge would be irrational. This is justice. There's a difference." He walked out, leaving her crumbling in the house they'd bought together, the life they'd built together, the future she'd destroyed with her own hands. 3 months later, Nelson sat in Morris's backyard, a beer in hand and the summer sun warm on his face. The divorce had been finalized quickly. Nikki's legal troubles made her desperate to settle without fighting. She'd pled guilty to fraud and embezzlement as part of a deal that gave her 18 months instead of 5 years. Russ Erickson got 4 years. His previous pattern of theft had caught up with him, and prosecutors threw the book at him. "You doing okay?" Morris asked, flipping burgers on the grill. "Better than I expected." Nelson took a sip of his beer. It was true. The initial pain had faded into something more like relief. "I thought I'd be angrier. Or sadder. You processed it differently. Most guys would have confronted her immediately, made a big scene. You played chess. I just wanted the truth to matter more than the feelings." Nelson watched smoke curl from the grill. "She made her choices. I made sure those choices had consequences." His phone buzzed. An email from his lawyer. The house sale had closed. With Nikki in prison and unable to contribute to the mortgage, Nelson had bought out her share at a steep discount. He now owned their home outright. "You know what's funny?" Nelson said. "She called me from prison last week. Seriously? What did she want? To apologize? To explain? To ask if there was any chance? He trailed off. I told her I appreciated the apology, but no. Some things you can't come back from. Morris nodded. You're a better man than me. I would have told her to rot. I'm not better. I'm just done. Nelson looked at his friend. I spent 8 years building a life with someone who threw it away for excitement and money. I'm not wasting another minute on bitterness. That night, back in his house now, Nelson sat in the quiet kitchen where he'd first planned his revenge. The space felt different, lighter, like a weight had been removed from the foundation. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Hello. Mr. Huffman? This is Candace Harden from Jefferson High's district office. We received your application for the Advanced Mathematics Program director position. We'd like to schedule an interview. Nelson smiled. He'd applied on a whim 2 weeks ago, figuring he had nothing to lose. The position was a significant step up, better pay, more influence, the chance to shape curriculum for the entire district. I'd be very interested, he said. When works for you? As he scheduled the interview, Nelson realized something. Nikki had been right about one thing. He had changed over the past few months, but not in the way she'd meant. He'd gotten stronger, sharper, more willing to fight for what he deserved. She'd thought the gym was her alone time, her secret space for transformation. She'd been wrong. The real transformation had happened here, in the wreckage of their marriage, when he'd chosen clarity over comfort and justice over forgiveness. Nelson Huffman had learned to recognize his own worth, and anyone who tried to take that from him again would find themselves outmatched by a man who knew exactly how to calculate the odds and stack them in his favor. He'd spent his career teaching students that every problem has a solution if you're willing to work through the variables. His marriage had been the hardest problem he'd ever solved, but he'd found the answer, executed the proof, and come out the other side with his integrity intact. That was victory enough.